The students laughed when he walked in wearing jeans and a t-shirt. The master smirked, folding his arms. "Go back to Hollywood, Stallone. This dojo is for real fighters." But Stallone didn't say a word. He just grabbed a black belt and started tying it around his waist. The room went silent. The master's face turned pale, because in that moment, everyone knew they had just mocked the wrong man. Welcome to Stallone Unleashed. Let's uncover what really happened. The dojo was filled with the hum of focused practice, a sanctuary where discipline and respect were the guiding forces. But in the center of it all, Master Ryu stood with an air of superiority, his posture perfect, a slight smirk playing on his lips as he watched his students move. He was a man whose reputation was built on both his skill and his arrogance, and the students who gathered at his dojo came seeking mastery. But they also came with a sense of awe, driven by stories of Ryu's unparalleled ability and his biting criticism. With each demonstration, the master would remind them of his own greatness, his every movement calculated to impress rather than instruct. He was a master, yes, but he was also a man who thrived on being the center of attention. The students had learned not to challenge him. His skill was undeniable, and his dominance over his dojo unquestioned. It was clear that Ryu enjoyed his role as the pinnacle of martial arts. He taught with a sharp, cutting tone, always demanding perfection, always expecting more. He saw himself as a gatekeeper to true mastery, and everyone around him was a mere apprentice in comparison, never truly worthy of the title of master. One afternoon, the dojo doors creaked open, and a man in casual clothing stepped in. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a purposeful gait that caught the eye. The man walked in confidently, but there was no fanfare, no dramatic entrance, just quiet determination in the way he moved through the space. Master Ryu glanced up, not out of courtesy but curiosity. He saw the stranger standing there, an unfamiliar figure who seemed out of place in the world of martial discipline. His eyes narrowed slightly as he took in a man, sizing him up. "Can I help you?" Ryu asked, his voice dripping with condescension. He had seen countless people come and go, and none had impressed him. This newcomer would be no different, he assumed. The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he gave a simple nod and walked towards the center of the room. Ryu's smirk widened. This was about to be another one of those moments, a chance for him to remind everyone who truly ruled the dojo. The air in the dojo was thick with tension, the kind that only a room full of martial artists could create. The students moved fluidly, practicing their forms, their movements sharp and purposeful. At the front, Master Ryu observed them with a critical eye, his arms crossed in front of him. His demeanor was the same as always, unmoved by anything, exuding an aura of authority that was as thick as the scent of sweat in the air. The door creaked again, but this time there was no casual arrival. This time, the footsteps that followed were purposeful and heavy. They were steps that commanded attention without asking for it. As the door opened wider, a figure stepped into the dojo, his silhouette imposing against the light from the hallway. At first, the students barely registered the interruption. It was a common occurrence for people to wander in from the street, looking for something to fill their time, seeking guidance, or simply observing. But this time, something was different. There was a weight to the presence in the doorway that made every student pause. The man who entered was none other than Sylvester Stallone. It was impossible not to recognize him. The square jaw, the unmistakable posture, and the sheer presence that seemed to fill the room. Ryu's gaze flicked up from his students, momentarily thrown off by the sight of the famous actor. For a moment, the dojo seemed to hold its breath. Ryu's initial reaction was to size up the newcomer, his eyes narrowing as he took in Stallone's appearance. The actor wasn't wearing the typical attire of a martial artist. No GI, no robes. Instead, he wore a simple t-shirt and jeans, his broad shoulders and muscular frame an unmistakable testament to his physical prowess. Stallone's gaze met Ryu's, and the two men locked eyes. There was no flinching, no hesitation. The master raised an eyebrow, his lips curling into a subtle smile, his mind already playing out how this unexpected guest would surely prove no different than the many before him. "I've heard a lot about this dojo," Stallone said, his voice calm but confident. "Thought I'd come and see if the stories are true." Master Ryu's eyes flickered with mild amusement as he regarded the actor standing before him. There was something about Stallone's calm, collected demeanor that didn't sit well with him. The man had walked in without fanfare, not a hint of the reverence Ryu was accustomed to from visitors. His presence was one of quiet confidence, but Ryu found it more irritating than impressive. "Well, I suppose you've come here to test your skills," Ryu said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "You're in the right place, though I can't say I'm expecting much from someone who hasn't even bothered to change in a proper attire." He gestured dismissively to Stallone's casual outfit, his gaze sharp as he scrutinized every detail. Stallone stood unmoved, his expression neutral, though something flickered behind his eyes. Amusement, perhaps, or maybe a touch of challenge. He wasn't here to impress anyone, certainly not the arrogant dojo master in front of him. "You're welcome to watch, but you may want to prepare for what happens next," Ryu continued, his smirk widening as he crossed his arms. "You see, this isn't just some place where anyone can waltz in and claim mastery. This dojo is for those who understand true discipline and skill. I doubt a Hollywood actor would know much about that." The students gathered around, their eyes flickering between Ryu and Stallone, sensing the tension that was building in the air. They had heard of the famed actor, of course, but none of them expected him to stick around, let alone challenge the master. Stallone's lips curled into a slight smile, but it was devoid of arrogance. "I don't need to be a master to know what I'm capable of," he replied, his voice low but steady. "But if you're offering a challenge," he let the words hang in the air, his eyes steady on Ryu. "I'm game." Ryu chuckled, his voice full of disdain. "Very well, but don't say I didn't warn you." He stepped back, ready to demonstrate why no one had ever dared challenge him. Until now. The dojo fell into an almost tangible silence as Ryu moved gracefully to the center, his every step exuding confidence. He surveyed Stallone with a look that bordered on disdain, as if he were an inconvenience, a minor distraction in an otherwise perfect display of his own superiority. "You're serious, then?" Ryu said, his voice cool, almost amused. "I should have known better than to expect anything less from an actor pretending to be tough. It's not all stunts and camera angles, you know. Real fighting requires precision, discipline, and years of dedication. You might be strong, Mr. Stallone, but strength is meaningless without control." Stallone's posture remained relaxed, his eyes never leaving Ryu. The man spoke with such certainty, with the arrogance of someone who believed his mastery could never be questioned. And for a moment, Ryu's words stung, until Stallone realized it wasn't directed at him, but the disrespectful attitude that Ryu projected onto anyone beneath him. Ryu continued his taunts, moving fluidly around Stallone as if the actor were already an afterthought. "You got the muscle, sure, but muscle is only good for lifting heavy things. It doesn't win battles. Don't expect me to take you seriously unless you can prove yourself. Show me some real technique, or I'll be bored in the first minute." The students watched, some with their hands clenched, others nervously shifting their weight. They'd heard Ryu talk down to countless people who had visited, but there was something different this time. The air felt thick with anticipation, almost as if they could feel the shift about to happen. Stallone didn't flinch. He didn't step forward or challenge Ryu in words. He simply observed, his gaze steady, his face neutral. Ryu was so wrapped up in his own bravado, so caught up in the idea that he was untouchable, that he didn't see the danger of underestimating someone like Stallone. The actor's calmness wasn't an invitation for Ryu's mockery. It was a warning, though one Ryu was too proud to heed. With a final, dismissive chuckle, Ryu assumed his stance, waiting for the actor to make the first move. The dojo had seen its fair share of visitors over the years, some serious, some just looking for a spectacle. But none had ever walked through the door with the same sense of quiet authority as the man who stood before them now. Sylvester Stallone wasn't just another passerby. There was something about him, something that made the usual banter and bravado feel hollow. The students, all of them dedicated martial artists, couldn't help but eye him from the corners of their vision. They had seen stars walk in and out of dojos before, but this man wasn't here for a promotional stunt or a photo op. There was no entourage, no flashy announcement, just Stallone, his hands casually tucked into the pockets of his jeans, moving with the confidence of someone who had long ago stopped seeking approval. Master Ryu's words, dripping with mockery, hung in the air like smoke. Yet, Stallone didn't seem to care. He wasn't responding to the challenge with words, but with a look, one that told Ryu and everyone else in the room that he wasn't here to fight theatrically, but to see if the master's reputation matched the man. Ryu, standing tall in the center of the dojo, was still confident. It was the same arrogance he displayed countless times before. But this time, something was different. The way Stallone looked at him, steady, unwavering, shifted something in the room. For once, Ryu wasn't the only one in control of the situation. He wasn't the only one in charge of the narrative. "Not here to impress you," Stallone said, his voice calm, steady. "Just here to see if you're really as good as they say." The words were simple, but they carried a weight that didn't need to be backed up by grand gestures or flashy displays. The students exchanged glances, some whispering to each other, try to make sense of the scene unfolding before them. Master Ryu, still unsure of the man before him, grinned. He wasn't concerned. After all, how could an actor ever match a true martial artist? Stallone didn't move an inch. He stood still, his posture relaxed yet purposeful, eyes locked on Master Ryu. It wasn't a challenge he threw down with flashy words or aggressive posturing. It was something far subtler. It was simply the calm in his presence. Master Ryu couldn't help but notice the quiet strength emanating from Stallone. Unlike other visitors who puffed up with bravado, Stallone was different. He wasn't here for theatrics. His shoulders were loose, his hands hanging by his sides, as if he had nothing to prove. The calm was unsettling for Ryu, who was accustomed to people either showing fear or arrogance, not this kind of quiet composure. The other students, too, felt it. There was no cocky grin, no exaggerated show of power. Stallone had entered the dojo as if it were just another part of his day, as if it weren't a place where egos collided and reputations were at stake. His quiet focus cut through the noise, drawing the attention of the room. Ryu, clearly frustrated by the lack of reaction, took a step forward, ready to call the actor's bluff. You may not know it, but you're in the presence of someone who has mastered not just the physical, but the mental as well. You won't find victory here with your calm approach alone. Stallone's gaze didn't waver. He didn't respond with words or mockery. He simply waited. His presence was his answer. He was the embodiment of stillness, a man who had faced some of the most intense moments of his life and had learned the value of calm in the face of adversity. The tension in the room heightened. Ryu's smirk began to fade as he noticed the quiet confidence Stallone carried with him. It was the kind of confidence that didn't need to boast, didn't need to shout. It was the confidence of someone who had nothing to prove and everything to show. "All right," Ryu finally said, his voice tight. "Let's see if that calm can handle reality." The room was thick with anticipation, and every student's eyes were locked on the two men at the center of the dojo. The atmosphere had shifted from one of casual practice to something far more electric, though the tension was palpable. Master Ryu was rarely challenged, and when he was, it usually came from someone eager to prove their worth with force, not silence. Yet here stood Sylvester Stallone, calm, unassuming, and quiet, offering none of the usual theatrics. The students exchanged furtive glances, unsure of what to make of this unlikely visitor. They had seen countless demonstrations of Ryu's superiority, witnessed firsthand how easily he dismissed anyone who wasn't worthy of his time. Most of the students had come to the dojo not just to learn martial arts, but to absorb Ryu's wisdom, to grow under his tutelage, and to bask in the glory of the master's presence. The idea that anyone could challenge him without fear was a concept they hadn't fully processed. One by one, they watched Stallone, who remained eerily still. His face was unreadable, his stance grounded. It was as if he had stepped into a different world altogether, one where no amount of flashy moves or harsh words would change the course of the encounter. For the first time, Ryu's usual superiority felt out of place. "Is he going to fight, or just stand there?" whispered one of the students to his neighbor. The question hung in the air, unanswered, as they waited for something, anything, to break the silence. Master Ryu, ever the man of action, couldn't bear the stillness any longer. His patience had worn thin. "If you're going to just stand there, at least show me something," Ryu sneered, his voice cutting through the quiet. He stepped forward with controlled aggression, a demonstration of his belief that no one, no matter how famous, could escape the mastery he had cultivated for years. But still, Stallone didn't flinch. The calm remained, and with each passing second, the skeptical eyes in the room grew more and more uncertain. They had come to respect Ryu's dominance, but now they weren't so sure. Something was shifting, and they could feel it in their bones. The air in the dojo was thick with the promise of something that would change the evening's course. Master Ryu's eyes never left Stallone, who still stood there, unmoving, a figure of quiet defiance. The room was waiting, the students watching, their breaths held in anticipation. Ryu had made the first move with his taunts, but the actor had not responded with words. Now, it was time to see if he could back up his calm with action. Without warning, Ryu lunged forward, his body flowing with the speed and precision of someone who had mastered his craft. His hands were a blur as they came at Stallone, aiming for a quick jab to test the actor's reflexes, to gauge his ability. The students leaned forward, waiting for the inevitable moment when Stallone would either block or be struck. Ryu's strikes were fast, deliberate, the kind that left no room for error. But Stallone was ready. His reaction was quick, but measured. He sidestepped with a slight shift of his weight, dodging the punch with effortless precision. It wasn't a grand display of strength or speed. It was simply control. He let the attack pass him, then adjusted his stance, his feet planted firmly on the floor. There was no arrogance, no showiness, just quiet readiness. Ryu's eyes narrowed, a flicker of surprise passing through them as he realized the actor hadn't been thrown off guard. Most people would have flinched, would have reacted out of instinct, but Stallone remained poised, his calm demeanor unwavering. Without missing a beat, Ryu pressed again, his fists coming at Stallone in a flurry. This time, Stallone didn't move. He blocked, his forearms catching the blows with ease. The impact was sharp, but he absorbed it with the kind of composure only someone with years of training and experience could muster. For the first time, Ryu felt a twinge of doubt. His opponent wasn't backing down. He wasn't rattled. And that, more than anything else, was starting to get under his skin. The first encounter had been more than just a test of physical skill. It had become a battle of wills. The exchange between the two men was becoming more than just a display of martial prowess. It was a dance of respect, unspoken yet undeniable. Ryu, once so sure of his dominance, now found himself challenged in a way he hadn't anticipated. The dojo, which had always been a place where he stood unchallenged, had shifted in atmosphere. Stallone's calm approach, his unwavering focus, had begun to erode the master's sense of invincibility. As they circled each other, the tension grew, the room thick with the sound of their movements. Each strike from Ryu came with precision and force. Yet each time, Stallone's calmness kept him one step ahead. It wasn't that he was faster or stronger. It was something deeper. Stallone had a presence that was impossible to ignore, a focus that kept him grounded, no matter what was thrown at him. Ryu's frustration began to show in his movements. His attacks, once fluid and graceful, now seemed rushed, more desperate. He pushed harder, but each attempt to overpower Stallone was met with the same calm, controlled resistance. It was as if Stallone had learned the true meaning of the belt he had worn in other martial arts, not as a symbol of status, but of a quiet, unyielding respect for the craft. The students were silent, watching the two men as if witnessing the very essence of martial discipline unfold before them. They had been taught that respect was earned through years of dedication and skill, but they hadn't realized that respect wasn't just given, it was shared. Stallone wasn't here to claim superiority. He wasn't here to outshine the master. He was here to show that true strength didn't need to be flaunted. It was earned through integrity, restraint, and the ability to stay grounded, no matter the storm around you. Ryu, breathing heavily now, realized something. This wasn't just a fight. It was a lesson. The belt he wore, the title he carried, meant nothing without the respect of others. And in that moment, he saw that it wasn't Stallone's fists or his calm that had truly challenged him. It was his quiet understanding of what it meant to truly be a master. Master Ryu stood still, sweat dripping down his face, his breath heavier now. The match had shifted from a contest of skill to something far more profound, something he hadn't expected. He had prided himself on his control, his ability to dominate any situation. But now, facing Stallone, he found himself in uncharted territory. The actor's calm, measured approach was wearing him down. There was no arrogance, no desperation, just a quiet understanding of the moment. A stark contrast to the way Ryu had always fought. As the two circled, Ryu's attacks had become more frantic, his movements sharper, his strikes harder. But Stallone was always one step ahead, his timing impeccable, his composure never wavering. Ryu had underestimated him. He had thought that this man, this outsider, would break under the pressure, that the swagger he exuded would fall apart the moment he faced someone who knew what true discipline was. But it hadn't happened. Stallone didn't flinch, didn't react. He simply moved, blocking, sidestepping, absorbing Ryu's attacks without ever losing focus. Each time Ryu tried to land a blow, it was met with calm resistance, like water flowing around stone. The realization hit Ryu harder than any strike. He wasn't just being outclassed by Stallone's skill. He was being outclassed by his presence. The actor wasn't here to show off or humiliate him. He wasn't here to prove a point. He was here to show what true mastery looked like. A mastery that went beyond physical skill and into the realm of inner strength and humility. Ryu's posture faltered for a moment, just a brief hesitation, but it was enough. The air between them changed. It wasn't just a contest anymore. It was a lesson, one that Ryu wasn't prepared for. His pride had blinded him to the most important lesson a master could learn: humility. Stallone, sensing the shift, took a step back, his stance still grounded. There was no need for triumph, no need for a display of superiority. He simply nodded, acknowledging the quiet transformation in Ryu's eyes. The lesson was in motion, and it was far more powerful than any fight. The silence in the dojo grew heavy as Ryu stood frozen, his breath catching in his chest. For the first time in years, he found himself facing something he couldn't simply overpower with skill or words. Stallone's calm was like a force of nature, unmovable, unyielding, and utterly disarming. Where Ryu had expected to be the one in control, it was the actor who had shifted the balance, not with force, but with quiet strength. Stallone didn't move forward, didn't taunt or boast. He simply stood, still as ever, waiting. His gaze never wavered from Ryu, his body loose, the tension that filled the room seeming to drain from him with every breath. There was no anger in his stance, no triumph in his eyes, just understanding. He wasn't here to fight for glory, to prove anything. He wasn't even here to defeat Ryu, though the shift in their dynamic made it clear that the master had been defeated in a way that went beyond physical confrontation. Ryu, for his part, was still processing what had just transpired. His mind raced, but his body refused to respond with the same confidence it once had. He had tried to break Stallone with force, to dominate him as he had countless others. But the actor had only offered quiet resistance, never rising to meet his aggression with arrogance or even anger. Instead, he had allowed Ryu to exhaust himself in the pursuit of something the master no longer understood. The dojo was still, the sounds of shallow breaths the only noise that filled the space. Stallone, after what seemed like an eternity, finally broke the silence, not with words, but with a simple movement. He lowered his hands to his sides, his posture still relaxed but filled with a quiet authority. "I'm not here to make a spectacle," he said, his voice steady calm. "I'm here to show you what real strength is, one that doesn't need to be flaunted." His words were simple, but they carried a weight that Ryu couldn't ignore. The lesson had been delivered, not through the fight, but through the silence between them. Stallone turned, his gaze lingering on the students who had witnessed everything. No applause, no show, just the quiet acknowledgement that something had shifted. Ryu wasn't the only master in the room anymore. The dojo, once a sacred space where discipline and respect reigned, now felt like a battleground. The students, who had been taught to revere Master Ryu, were suddenly faced with a reality they had never considered. They had witnessed something extraordinary, something that made them question their entire understanding of mastery. Master Ryu, his face flushed with anger and disbelief, stood frozen in the center of the room. His mind buzzed with confusion. How could this man, this actor, have stripped him of his confidence so easily? How could someone who didn't carry the same years of experience, the same dedication to martial arts, come in and teach him the lesson he had just learned? His hands clenched into fists, the fury of humiliation rising within him. He had always been the one in control. He had always been the one others looked to for guidance, for respect. But now that control had slipped through his fingers like sand. The students were silent, watching the master with a mix of awe and apprehension. They had seen him teach with sharpness, but they had never seen him like this, vulnerable, shaken, human. Their loyalty to Ryu had been unquestioned for so long, but now a crack had appeared in the pedestal they had placed him on. They were witnessing something more profound than a physical confrontation. They were witnessing the collapse of the arrogance that had defined their teacher. Ryu's eyes flared with disdain as he turned away from Stallone, unwilling to acknowledge the quiet power the actor had wielded so effortlessly. His pride was bruised, and in that moment it was all he could feel. "You've humiliated me." Ryu finally spat, his voice tight, his words cutting through the silence. "You've disrespected this dojo, this art, and everything it stands for." The students exchanged uneasy glances, the words hanging heavily in the air. They knew what they had seen, what they had learned, and it didn't align with the way Ryu had always presented himself. The disrespect wasn't just in Stallone's quiet approach. It was in Ryu's failure to acknowledge that strength didn't always come from dominance. The dojo's very foundation had been rocked, and for the first time, it seemed that the man who had built it was the one in need of a lesson. Ryu's pride surged again, a defensive reflex that drowned out the unsettling doubts creeping into his mind. He couldn't let Stallone's calm, controlled presence be the final word on this encounter. Not here, not in front of his students. His dojo, his legacy, had to remain unshaken. With a sharp inhale, he straightened, his gaze hardening as he looked back at Stallone. "You think you've taught me something? You think I've been humiliated?" Ryu's voice rose, now laced with a sharp edge. The students looked away, uncomfortable, but none dared to move. "You haven't even begun to understand the art you've tried to challenge." Ryu stepped forward, his stance widening, his arms lifting to demonstrate the elegance of his martial skill. His words were deliberate, commanding, and his presence regained some of the authority he had briefly lost. This dojo, this craft, it demands mastery of the body and the mind. It is about more than just calmness or being quiet. It is about dominance. You see, only those who can truly control their opponent's body and mind can claim to be masters. He paced in front of the students, eyes gleaming, his chest swelling with the renewed power of his own voice. "You come here thinking you can waltz in, offer a few words, and that's enough to unseat me. But I will show you exactly how much strength it takes to truly dominate. You may be strong, but you are still only a shadow of what true mastery looks like." Ryu turned back to Stallone, his expression no longer the wary uncertainty it had been moments before. Now it was filled with defiance. "I demand more. Prove to me you are more than just a man of muscle. I will not accept being reduced to a lesson for you, Stallone. This dojo is mine, and it will remain mine." The room was silent. The words hung heavy in the air. Ryu's demands weren't just an effort to regain his status. They were an assertion that no one, no matter their background, no matter their composure, could just waltz in and teach him anything. His martial prowess was his, and he was determined to defend it. The challenge was now set, no longer about skill alone, but about his need to prove that his legacy could never be undone by anyone, not even the man standing before him. Stallone listened in silence, the words from Master Ryu swirling around him. The dojo master's boastful demands echoed in the air, a clear attempt to reassert control. But Stallone didn't flinch. He didn't feel the need to respond with words. Actions, as he had always believed, spoke louder. The room was thick with tension, every student watching with wide eyes, unsure of what was about to happen. Ryu's posture, once fluid and controlled, had now taken on the energy of someone eager to prove something, someone who needed to prove something. His arrogance had returned, louder than before. He wanted to show that his dominance was unchallenged, that no one, not even someone as famous as Stallone, could step into his world and make a mockery of him. Stallone stood still for a moment, his gaze fixed on the master. He wasn't angry, nor was he trying to match Ryu's bravado. He had no interest in engaging in a contest of egos. He was here to show something far simpler, to demonstrate what true mastery was, not through force, but through the quiet understanding of one's own strength. Finally, with a deliberate calm, Stallone took a step forward. His movement was unhurried, but every step carried a quiet authority. His posture didn't shift, his expression didn't change. He wasn't here to win or to lose. He was here to teach, just as much as Ryu had tried to teach him. The room seemed to hold its breath as Stallone moved toward the center of the dojo. Ryu's eyes narrowed, no longer sure whether this was simply another act of defiance or the beginning of something he couldn't control. But what he didn't understand was that Stallone wasn't trying to control anything. He wasn't even trying to defeat Ryu. He was simply stepping into the arena, prepared to face whatever came next, with the same quiet confidence that had carried him through a lifetime of challenges. As Stallone came to a stop just a few feet away from Ryu, he met the master's gaze. No words, just the weight of the moment, the challenge that wasn't in the fight itself, but in how the fight would be approached. Ryu's world was about to be shattered, not by strength, but by the absence of ego. The dojo was a silent battlefield, charged with anticipation. Ryu, his pride and arrogance still clinging to him like a second skin, watched as Stallone took his position across from him. The challenge was clear now. No more words, no more boasts, only the raw truth of their skills, tested in the arena of the dojo. Ryu's movements were fluid, his body springing into action with the precision of a trained predator. He struck quickly, a series of fast, calculated blows aimed at Stallone's chest and ribs. The speed was impressive, the strikes sharp and aggressive, meant to overwhelm any opponent who dared face him. Ryu was not just attacking. He was testing, searching for an opening, looking for the moment when Stallone would slip, when his calm would falter. But Stallone didn't flinch. He didn't retreat. He stood firm, his stance steady, eyes focused on Ryu's every movement. The actor's hands were loose at his sides, his body relaxed, a stark contrast to the intensity of Ryu's assault. The first few strikes were blocked with minimal effort, his movements smooth and deliberate. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't extravagant, just pure control, a reflection of years of discipline honed not through sheer force, but through knowing when to yield and when to strike. Ryu pressed harder, frustration beginning to creep into his movements. The actor was blocking with an ease that made no sense. No one had ever moved like this in his dojo. No one had ever withstood his barrage so effortlessly. He could feel the doubt creeping in, but he refused to let it show. With a sharp grunt, he launched into a spin, hoping to catch Stallone off guard with a low kick aimed at his legs. But Stallone was already one step ahead. He shifted his weight, sidestepping with grace, letting the attack miss by mere inches. The movement was almost imperceptible, but to anyone watching, it was a perfect example of how Stallone was controlling the fight, not by outmatching Ryu's speed, but by understanding the rhythm of the battle. For the first time, Ryu's eyes widened slightly. This wasn't just a test of strength, it was a test of something deeper. And Stallone was passing with quiet ease. Master Ryu's frustration simmered just beneath the surface, but it didn't show. He couldn't afford to show it. Instead, he pushed harder, deeper into the attack, as if to prove to himself that he was still in control. The first few moments of doubt had shaken him, but he was a master. He could not afford to be anything less. Not here, not now. With a sharp, almost imperceptible smirk, Ryu launched himself forward once more, this time using a series of rapid feints and calculated moves designed to throw Stallone off balance. His feet moved quickly, a blur of motion as he darted in and out, each strike faster, sharper than the last. This was Ryu at his peak, the culmination of years of training and discipline, honed to a razor's edge. No one had ever lasted this long against him, let alone blocked his strikes with such ease. Not bad. For an actor, Ryu muttered under his breath, his voice thick with disdain. He was baiting Stallone now, trying to provoke him into reacting, trying to push him into a mistake. But despite the taunt, Stallone's calm remained unshaken. The actor's eyes never left him, his posture still relaxed, like a man who was simply waiting for the right moment. Ryu's arrogance fueled his every movement. He was certain now, Stallone was merely a passing challenge, someone who had gotten lucky, someone who hadn't truly earned his place in the dojo. The more Ryu struck, the more confident he became, as if each successful block by Stallone was another step toward victory. "You'll learn quickly, actor," Ryu said, his voice growing louder as he pressed in. "This is the real world, not one of your stage fights." But even as he spoke, the hint of doubt in the back of his mind was growing louder, nagging at him. Stallone was still there, still moving with the same quiet composure. And each time Ryu pressed harder, he realized something. The more force he put in, the more it slipped away from him. The fight was no longer about strength. It was about control. And the one thing he couldn't control was the ease with which Stallone moved, effortless, composed, and completely unaffected by the master's arrogance. Ryu's strikes were coming faster now, his every move aimed at overwhelming Stallone, but with each passing second, the actor's calm only grew more pronounced. The dojo master, once the unquestioned authority of the room, now found himself struggling against an opponent who wasn't driven by brute force, who didn't rely on the showmanship of speed and power. Stallone's strength wasn't in his size, nor in the sheer force of his punches. It was in his unwavering composure, his ability to read the flow of the fight and let his body move with it, not against it. With a sudden shift, Ryu launched himself at Stallone, throwing a combination of rapid jabs and a roundhouse kick aimed directly at his ribs. The force behind the kick would have sent most opponents sprawling, but Stallone simply sidestepped, allowing the strike to miss by a fraction of an inch. He didn't rush in, didn't make any grand counterattack. Instead, he remained in his defensive stance, relaxed, eyes locked on Ryu's every movement. For a moment, Ryu faltered. The blow had missed, but it was more than just a miss. It was the realization that his opponent wasn't playing by the same rules. Where he had expected a battle of strength, Stallone was showing him something entirely different, a fight of endurance, patience, and insight. Ryu tried to regain his rhythm, his breathing growing heavier as the exertion took its toll. He attacked again, but this time, Stallone didn't block. He didn't need to. He simply moved inside Ryu's guard, a quick step forward that placed him in striking distance, and with a controlled precision, landed a light tap to Ryu's solar plexus. It wasn't a punch meant to hurt. It was a strike meant to show Ryu just how fragile his arrogance had been. Ryu staggered slightly, a breathless gasp escaping his lips. The realization hit him harder than any blow. The true strength of a fighter didn't come from outmuscling an opponent or making the loudest noise. It came from being in complete control of oneself, knowing when to strike and when to step back. Stallone wasn't just winning the fight. He was showing Ryu what true strength looked like. It wasn't about domination. It was about mastery over the moment. And for the first time, Ryu understood the lesson. Ryu's breath came in sharp, labored gasps, his body screaming for relief, but his mind was still trapped in the fight. He had spent years perfecting his craft, dedicating his life to martial discipline. But everything he had been taught, everything he had believed, seemed to crumble in the face of Stallone's quiet presence. The actor had not only weathered Ryu's onslaught, but had done so with the kind of calm that spoke of a deeper understanding, one that Ryu couldn't deny. As the seconds stretched on, Ryu's movement slowed. The arrogance that had once been his armor now felt hollow, as if he were carrying the weight of his own overconfidence on his shoulders. He was fighting harder, faster, but it was clear that his pride had made him reckless. His strikes were wild now, his focus fractured by the realization that he wasn't in control anymore. Stallone's pace, however, remained the same, steady, controlled, unhurried. It was as if the actor had already won, not through strength, but by simply understanding the flow of the fight, the ebb and the rise of each movement. He wasn't here to destroy Ryu. He was here to show him that mastery wasn't about domination. It was about humility. Finally, Ryu stopped, his hands falling to his sides as his chest heaved with exhaustion. The fight had drained him, not physically, but emotionally. In that moment, he realized how much of his life had been spent chasing an illusion of invincibility, of power that came from being unchallenged. But now, standing across from Stallone, he saw something he had never considered before. True strength was quiet, patient, and earned through discipline, not ego. Stallone took a step back, his expression unchanged, as though the fight had been nothing more than a demonstration. The room was still, the students watching, their gazes flickering between their master and the man who had shown him the truth. Ryu swallowed hard, his gaze dropping to the floor. "I was wrong," he said, his voice low. "I thought strength was only about force. But now I see it's about control and humility." Stallone nodded once, a small, approving gesture. It wasn't a victory for him. It was a lesson for them both. The silence in the dojo was almost suffocating, and Ryu could feel it pressing against him, a heavy weight that refused to lift. His thoughts churned as he stood there, facing the man who had shattered his understanding of what it meant to be a master. Experience had always been Ryu's strongest weapon, but now it felt inadequate against the quiet force Stallone carried. Ryu's ego, once an unshakable pillar, was cracking under the pressure. He had always believed that mastery was about dominance, about being the best and proving it at every turn. His years of training, his countless victories, none of it seemed to matter anymore. Stallone hadn't defeated him with sheer strength or flashy moves. He had done it by showing him that true mastery wasn't something to flaunt. It was something earned, something lived. Stallone remained motionless, his gaze steady and unflinching, waiting for Ryu to make the next move. It was almost as if the actor knew that the real battle wasn't one of fists, but of wills, of minds. The fight had never been about winning. It had been about exposing the truth. And that truth was becoming clearer with every passing second. Ryu's fists clenched again, the weight of his own thoughts threatening to overwhelm him. He had lived by the idea that experience was everything, that the years spent honing his body and mind gave him an undeniable edge. But now, facing Stallone, that edge felt like nothing more than a brittle illusion. The clash was no longer just physical. It had become an internal struggle. Ryu had spent so long pushing others to their limits, forcing them to bend to his will, that he had never stopped to question his own methods. Stallone wasn't just a fighter. He was a mirror, reflecting everything Ryu had become. His ego, his pride, the need to always be in control, it had all led to this moment, a clash of experience and ego that left Ryu feeling more vulnerable than he had ever been. Stallone, still watching him with that quiet, unshakable composure, offered no words of victory. There was no need. The lesson had been learned, and Ryu knew it. The real fight wasn't against an opponent. It was against the self. Ryu stood still, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The dojo was silent, the tension between him and Stallone palpable, yet something was shifting within him. The arrogance, the pride that had once fueled every move, now felt like a burden, an obstacle. For the first time in his life, he was questioning everything, his approach to martial arts, his entire philosophy. How had it come to this? How had he let himself be so blinded by the idea of dominance that he failed to see the truth standing before him? Stallone had not moved, still as composed as ever. His gaze was unwavering, his posture relaxed. But it wasn't just his calm that had unsettled Ryu. It was the way he had handled this challenge, not by overpowering him, but by showing him a different way to fight, a different way to live. Ryu took a step back, feeling the exhaustion from his own efforts weigh on him. His body was still strong, but the fatigue was mental, emotional. For so long, he had believed that he was untouchable, that his experience and skill would always make him superior. But now, in front of Stallone, in front of his own students, he realized that strength didn't come from years of dominance. It came from understanding, from balance, from humility. The turning point came slowly, almost imperceptibly. It wasn't a single strike, a dramatic move, but a realization that began deep within him. Ryu lowered his fists, his breath evening out, and for the first time, he looked at Stallone, not as an opponent to defeat, but as a peer, someone who had taught him something he couldn't have learned in any dojo or under any master. "I've spent my life fighting for control," Ryu said, his voice quieter than before, more reflective. "But control, it's not everything." He paused, looking at Stallone. "I've been wrong. It's never been about dominance. It's about balance and understanding." Stallone nodded, a small but knowing smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. The fight had never been about defeating Ryu. It had been about showing him the way. And now, the turning point had arrived. Ryu had finally seen it. The dojo was still, the silence almost deafening. Ryu stood facing Stallone, his mind racing, but his body calmer than it had been in years. For the first time, he didn't feel the need to prove anything. The fight, once a battle for dominance, had turned into something far more profound, a test of understanding, of ego, and of true strength. Stallone had stepped back, his posture relaxed but attentive, allowing Ryu the space he needed. The fight wasn't about winning anymore. It was about the moment that lay between them. The truth was about to surface, and it wasn't going to be revealed through fists or force. It would come through the acceptance of what Ryu had been blind to for so long. Ryu's hands trembled slightly, not from fear or weakness, but from the realization that he had been living in the shadow of his own ego. He had built this dojo, this empire, on the belief that mastery could be taken, that strength was about conquering others. But now, with Stallone standing before him, the truth was undeniable. This wasn't about defeating an opponent. It was about understanding that true mastery came from within. It came from the ability to face oneself, to strip away the layers of pride and arrogance, and to accept that strength wasn't always about overpowering those around you. It was about balance, humility, and respect. Respect for others, yes, but also respect for oneself. Ryu's gaze shifted to the students who stood silently around the dojo, watching, waiting. They had witnessed the entire journey, from Ryu's arrogance to his humbling. And in that silence, Ryu understood. The lesson had been learned, not through force, but through presence. Stallone had shown him that strength wasn't something you took. It was something you earned, something you gave. "I see it now," Ryu said, his voice barely a whisper, yet clear. "True strength, it's not in the fight itself. It's in the choice to fight with humility." His eyes met Stallone's, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Stallone nodded, his expression unchanged, but there was something in his eyes, something like approval. The moment of truth had arrived, and Ryu had finally stepped into it. Ryu stood motionless, the weight of his own realization settling heavily upon him. It was as if a veil had been lifted from his eyes, revealing a truth he had spent his entire life avoiding. The world he had constructed, the philosophy he had adhered to, built on dominance, control, and superiority, felt flimsy now, like a fragile shell ready to crumble. The very foundation of his mastery had been built on the belief that strength was something you imposed on others, that it was a force that could be controlled. But standing before Stallone, he understood that true strength wasn't something you took or demanded. It was something you embodied quietly, humbly, and without the need for accolades. For the first time in years, Ryu felt the weight of his own ego, the arrogance that had driven him to push so hard, to challenge so aggressively. His entire life had been spent proving that he was the best, that no one could ever challenge him or his teachings. But now, with Stallone in front of him, the truth was clear. He had been blinded by his own need for validation, his need to be untouchable. Stallone hadn't tried to defeat him with strength or skill. He had simply existed in the moment, showing Ryu that real mastery wasn't about overpowering others. It was about self-awareness, control, and understanding the ebb and flow of life, of movement, of energy. It wasn't about how many battles you won or how many people you could break. It was about knowing when to yield, when to step back, and when to fight. Ryu closed his eyes for a moment, letting the weight of the realization settle deep within him. He had spent so many years teaching his students to fight for dominance, to never show weakness. But now he understood that true strength came from showing your vulnerabilities, from acknowledging that no one, not even a master, was invincible. When he opened his eyes, his gaze met Stallone's. There was no arrogance left in him, only gratitude. He had learned the most important lesson of all, that to be a true master, one must first be a student. And in that quiet, humbling moment, Ryu knew he had finally found what he had been searching for all along. Ryu stood at the center of the dojo, his heart still racing, but now with a different kind of energy. The clarity that had eluded him for so long was finally within his grasp. His fight with Stallone had shifted from a battle of strength to one of insight. And though he had come to terms with the deeper lesson of humility, he could feel something else rising within him. A curiosity, an unexpected impulse. He had spent his life teaching his students that strength came from dominating others. But now, with everything he had learned, he felt an urge to demonstrate something far more powerful than control. Without warning, Ryu moved again. It wasn't a calculated strike or a practice form. It was a spontaneous action, an instinct that came from a place deeper than technique. He stepped forward quickly, not to attack, but to close the distance between himself and Stallone. The suddenness of it threw off the usual rhythm of the dojo, and the students instinctively leaned in, their eyes wide with anticipation. Stallone was prepared, his body still as calm as ever, his gaze unwavering. But Ryu wasn't trying to land a hit. Instead, he made an unexpected move, a simple gesture, a reach for Stallone's wrist, a pull not with force, but with intention. It was a symbol of something new, a shift in how Ryu viewed the fight, how he viewed strength itself. The action caught Stallone off guard, not because it was a strike, but because it was a display of vulnerability. Ryu wasn't looking to overpower, to win. He was reaching out, not with his fists, but with his humanity. The movement wasn't meant to test Stallone's skill. It was meant to test himself, to see if he could take what he had learned and put it into action in the most unexpected way. Stallone paused for a brief moment, registering the change in the air. The room felt different, lighter somehow, as though the weight of Ryu's old ego had been lifted. With a slow nod, Stallone responded, not with force, but with an acknowledgement of the shift that had just occurred. It wasn't about strength anymore. It was about connection. And in that unexpected move, Ryu had finally learned the true meaning of mastery. The dojo was still, but the silence now felt different. It wasn't the tense, charged silence of a battle on the verge of eruption. It was a calm, quiet space where something profound had shifted, something that couldn't be articulated in words, only felt in the stillness between them. Ryu, his chest still rising and falling with steady breaths, looked at Stallone with a new kind of understanding. The arrogant fire that had once driven him to prove his superiority was now replaced by a deeper, more authentic strength. It was a strength that came from the quiet confidence of a person who had nothing left to prove. Stallone hadn't needed to show off. He hadn't needed to win in the traditional sense. Instead, he had demonstrated that mastery didn't come from dominating others, but from understanding oneself, from seeing strength in humility, and in the choices one made in the heat of a challenge. Stallone, for his part, stood just as calmly as he had throughout the fight, not a hint of arrogance or triumph in his posture. He didn't need to say anything. His presence spoke volumes. The respect Ryu now felt wasn't born from the bruising of his ego. It was born from the knowledge that Stallone had done what no one had ever done before. He had shattered Ryu's misguided beliefs about strength, forcing him to see that true mastery was something deeper, something more human. Ryu took a step forward, the first step he had taken in true humility in years. He lowered his head slightly, not out of defeat, but out of respect. "You've shown me something I failed to see," he said, his voice steady but softer than before. "Strength isn't about dominance, it's about understanding." Stallone gave a small nod, acknowledging Ryu's words without the need for grand gestures. The moment was quiet, but heavy with meaning. For the first time, Ryu felt the weight of true respect, earned not through power, but through understanding, not through victory, but through the shared experience of growth. And as Ryu stood there, facing the man who had taught him the hardest lesson of his life, he knew that this was a new beginning, not just for himself, but for the dojo, for his students, and for the way he would teach from this day forward. Respect, Ryu realized, was never something to demand. It was something to earn. And in that moment, he had earned it, not just from Stallone, but from himself. The days following the confrontation in the dojo were different, charged with a new energy, a new sense of purpose. The students, once captivated by the image of their master's unchallenged dominance, now looked at him with a different kind of admiration. It wasn't the reverence born from fear or awe of his skill. It was respect, the kind earned through humility, through the ability to accept a lesson when it was offered, no matter the source. Ryu had changed. His teaching methods, once built on the foundation of unyielding control and superiority, had shifted. He no longer demanded respect from his students. He showed them the power of quiet strength, of balance, and of humility. It wasn't about proving his superiority. It was about showing them the path to mastery through discipline, self-awareness, and the courage to learn from others, no matter their background or status. In the weeks that followed, Ryu's dojo became a place of quiet transformation. He still taught with the same commitment to discipline, but now he encouraged his students to embrace the lessons of life outside of the dojo. Strength wasn't just physical, it was mental, emotional, and spiritual. It was about understanding oneself and others, about recognizing that no one, not even a master, was beyond the reach of growth. Stallone had long since left, his visit nothing more than a brief encounter, but his influence remained. The actor's quiet confidence, his humility in the face of Ryu's challenge, had left an indelible mark. Ryu's respect for him grew over time, not for his fighting skill, but for the way he embodied the strength of character that Ryu had spent his life searching for, yet had never fully understood. One evening, as the last student left the dojo, Ryu stood alone, looking at the empty space where he had once imposed his ego. The shadows of the evening stretched across the floor, but in the quiet of the room, Ryu felt a sense of peace, the kind that comes only when one has truly found their center. The legacy of quiet strength was his to carry now, not as a teacher, but as a student, forever learning, forever growing.